Hi YouTube, my name is Jack, and today we're gonna do the spiel. So, first off, sorry about the streaky lights coming down from up above. There's not much I can do about it. It's because of the way the lighting in my apartment is, and it's dark right now because it's winter. That's how that works. The spiel to which I am referring is the spiel that I give when people want to know what Gardnerian Wicca is. This is a longer version of the spiel, so this is something that I would say to seekers that I'm meeting with for the first time, or to people who ask about what I do and who seem to be genuinely interested in knowing the answer, as opposed to wanting just a very surface level, cursory, like it's a pagan witchcraft thing and we have a goddess and we have a god. So here's the more in-depth version of that spiel. It occurred to me today that I've never actually done this on the channel, and for a channel where I talk so much about Gardnerian Wicca, it would be helpful to have some context of what Gardnerian Wicca is, or at least the narrative about Gardnerian Wicca that I'm often implicitly taking on when I talk about Wicca, right? Wicca is a variegated and decentralized thing. Lots of people are going to have lots of different perspectives on what it is, what its defining features are, what its history is. This is the version that I subscribe to. And I think that's useful and relevant information if you're engaging with any of the other videos that I put out on this channel. So, without further ado, let's dive in. And our story starts in 1951. Because up until 1951, it was illegal to call oneself a witch in the United Kingdom. There was a surviving law on the books called the Witchcraft Act from 1734, which made witchcraft a crime punishable by a fine and up to a year in prison. That, in turn, was much more lenient than the witchcraft law that had preceded it, which, you know, there was a period in time where being convicted of witchcraft could have you killed. But there was this law from the 1700s that was still on the books in the UK up until the 1950s. And in 1951, a couple of things happened. Hi, sweetie. The first is that there was increasing political pressure to get rid of the Witchcraft Act. Okay, we'll come up. We'll come up. Yeah, that's okay. To get rid of the Witchcraft Act because it was being misapplied to kind of... Kat, you're right on the microphone. I'm so sorry. The Witchcraft Act was being used to persecute religious minorities in the United Kingdom, and really specifically spiritualists. So spiritualist churches are, by and large, a pretty tame affair, but spiritualist ceremonies include mediumship and an attempt to communicate with the spirits of the beloved dead. And this was something that people found weird, and police were doing raids on spiritualist services. Spiritualists were being sort of jailed on trumped-up charges, and often the Witchcraft Act was being cited as an excuse to discriminate against and legally persecute spiritualists. So there was incredible pressure, political pressure, coming in from the spiritualist community and from other concerned parties to repeal the Witchcraft Act because of the way it was being misused. The other thing that happens is this weird little, like world war, and there's a Holocaust, and all of a sudden it seems like the world has bigger, more real problems to deal with, and maybe witches aren't what we need to be concerned with. So there's kind of a point where, like, people are going, wait, it's 1951, there's no such thing as witches, this law is stupid, let's repeal it. And so in 1951, the Witchcraft Act is repealed, and it is replaced with the Fraudulent Mediums Act, which makes it illegal to defraud someone of money by claiming to have magical powers. Right? You can call yourself whatever you want, but if you are stealing thousands of pounds from old widow Wilson, then we've got a problem. The Fraudulent Mediums Act is also no longer on the books. It has subsequently been replaced. But the vein of, like, you can call yourself whatever you want, but once money is involved, things get complicated, is still present in British law today. So all of this is to say, the Witchcraft Act gets repealed in 1951, and at that time, a retired British civil servant named Gerald Gardner comes forward and says, "Surprise, I'm a witch." And Gardner claimed to have been initiated into a surviving pre-Christian witchcraft religion, which was the indigenous religion of the British Isles, had gone underground with the arrival of Christianity, and had survived in secret up until the present day. That is not true. That is absolute bullshit. It is likely, nonetheless, that Gardner sincerely believed that, or at least believed something like that. The best evidence that we have right now suggests that Gardner was initiated into something, and effectively that the people who initiated him had made it all up. So the best evidence we have suggests that Gardner was initiated by a group of people who came together in the late 20s and early 30s, who were in a small village in southern England, and who were kind of alternative bohemian people. They were interested in magic and ritual. They went to seances together. They belonged to a theater company that put on like allegorical mystery plays. And these were people who, were kind of weird. They were kind of out there. They were into magic and, the occult and all that spooky stuff. And it was unusual that they should all find each other in such a high concentration in this small village in the south of England. There are complicated historical and contextual things that made that happen, having to do with like co-masonry and Mabel Basant Scott, and that's not super important. The point is, they all found each other in the early 20th century in this small village in a relatively conservative, demure part of the country. And they got this feeling that they knew each other and that they had known each other before. And over time, they developed an idea that they had known each other before in a previous incarnation as a coven of witches. And these people, before they knew Gerald Gardner, started to fuck around and find out. They started to mess around with ritual and magic, and they were experimenting, trying to recreate what they imagined the witchcraft might have been like, that they had practiced together as a coven of witches in a past life. And as a little bit of context for this, the idea of an ancient pre-Christian witchcraft cult sounds ludicrous to us today. It sounded more plausible at the time, largely due to the works of Margaret Murray, who had published a book called The Witch Cult in Western Europe in 1929, sometime in the 20s, I think it was 29. But Margaret Murray had published The Witch Cult in Western Europe, where she argued that the people who were put on trial for witchcraft in the early modern period were in fact the practitioners of a surviving pagan religion that was being literally demonized by the Catholic Church, not just the Catholic Church, but by Christianity, in an attempt to stamp out its rival religions. Murray was not the first person who had the witch cult hypothesis, but she is the best known for it, and she is certainly the one who popularized it the most, largely because she got hired to write the witchcraft entry in the Encyclopedia Britannica, and so then her narrative about witchcraft as a pre-Christian pagan religion became the dominant narrative in popular culture surrounding witchcraft. And at the time that these people in what would become the New Forest Coven were coming together and sort of experimenting with ritual and magic, they would very much be familiar with the Murray hypothesis, and they would have taken it as more or less simple fact that there had been a pre-Christian witchcraft religion. And so they saw themselves not as inventing something new, but as experimenting magically to try to recreate a pagan witchcraft cult that had been lost. So we have these people, and they meet Gerald Gardner, and they like him, and they bring him in. And then in 1951, when the Witchcraft Act is repealed, Gardner goes public. And the witchcraft that Gardner introduces to the world is an initiatory mystery cult, which means two main things. The first is that in order to join the cult, someone would have to be initiated by another person who was already a member. So there's a chain of initiatory lineage where you were initiated by someone who was initiated by someone who was initiated by someone, etc. The second thing that it meant was that upon initiation, members took an oath of secrecy, that there were certain things they would not discuss with outsiders. And different initiates interpret that oath of secrecy differently, so like people have their own comfort levels. But broadly speaking, the two things that are widely agreed upon are that you do not reveal the identities of other initiates, and you do not reveal the specifics of what happens in any initiatory ritual. The identities of other initiates is a really big one, right? There have been historical instances where people lost their jobs, where people had bricks thrown through their windows. I can think of at least one instance where someone had their children taken away from them by a court because it came out that they were a witch. And the idea of initiatory secrecy is in part to protect the identities of your other initiates, because certainly at the time that Wicca emerged, there were serious negative social repercussions for being known to be a witch. And even today, there are lots of places and areas and circumstances under which it is not okay for someone to be out. And so part of what the Oath of Secrecy covers is the identities and the safety of other initiates. And then as to like the nature of the witch cult itself, it was a priesthood dedicated to two deities. It was dedicated to a goddess who was a lunar mother goddess. She was associated with the moon and the earth and the tides and kind of like all the mother nature-y shit. And then her consort, the horned god of sex, death, hunting, agriculture, drugs, rock and roll, and all the fun stuff. And these two deities were kind of the central focus of the cult. The cult also had a really heavy emphasis on cyclicality. So the cycles of death and rebirth in nature, whether that's in the phases of the moon or the cycle of the seasons, or again, remember the circumstances under which Wicca first comes into being. There's this idea of reincarnation and of people having known each other in a past life. That's how Wicca came into existence in the first place. So there is implicitly an idea of reincarnation present in the witch cult as Gardner introduces it. Now, today, there's a lot of diversity in Wicca, so you won't necessarily find all of those things in the same way that I'm describing them, even in initiatory covens. But that's roughly the shape of the witch cult that Gardner introduces to the world. And what happens when Gardner introduces this is that demand exceeds supply, because there are lots of people who are really interested in signing up for this religion. Again, keep in mind, a lot of people sincerely believe this to be the old religion of the British Isles. And there are a lot of people who are seeking it out. There are more people seeking it than are able to offer it, especially because covens, the basic units into which Gardnerian Wicca is organized, cap out at about a dozen people. Right? This is a religion that you're practicing like with a group of people in your living room. It is designed for a small, intimate gathering. People like to say 13 is the maximum number for a coven because 13 is witchy. It's a dozen. Effectively, when you get to more than a dozen people, the logistics of Gardnerian ritual start to break down. And that's not to say that there aren't ways that you can adapt it, but like the ritual is really intended for a small gathering of people. And so you have these small groups, which are spreading very slowly because you're initiated, you're with a group for years, and then at some point you might or might not go on to start a group of your own. But so Wicca spreads slowly. And especially when it comes to the United States, there is one coven in the mid-60s. It is in New York, and there's an entire continent of people who are interested in Wicca and don't have access to it. And so what happens is that over the course of the second half of the 20th century, people start innovating. People start doing their own thing and calling it Wicca. And you find self-consciously invented traditions. You find people who say, I am founding the XYZ tradition of Wicca. You find traditions that are sort of attempting to claim legitimacy with an imagined ancient lineage, which, to be fair, is what Gardner did as well. But like, you'll find people who say, oh, I was initiated by my grandmother in her kitchen, and she was a witch, and she practiced this surviving witch cult. And famously, this is one of the versions of the narrative that Alexander's perpetuated, although he provided different narratives at different points in time. And then you also find people who are just doing things on their own and kind of doing either a non-traditional, just like a group of people coming together to do magic and calling that a coven, or people who are just totally on their own and practicing solitary and doing witchcraft and calling it Wicca. You get all these sorts of things, so that by the time we get to the present day, witchcraft means a lot of things to a lot of different people. Wicca means a lot of things to a lot of different people. And when I talk about Wicca on this channel, by and large, I am talking about the Wicca that Gerald Gardner first introduces to the world. Because that's the Wicca that I practice. So I was initiated by someone who was initiated by someone who was initiated by someone, etc., going straight back to Gerald Gardner. And the Wicca that I practice is characterized by those features that I described here. It's an initiatory mystery cult, so you can only join by being initiated by someone who's already a member and is qualified to do so. When you're initiated, you take an oath of secrecy that there are certain things you're not going to talk about, including, vitally, the identities of other initiates. It's a priesthood of two deities, a goddess and a god. It is focused on cyclicality through the phases of the moon, the seasons, reincarnation. Like, that is the Wicca that I practice. And then also there is, of course, spellcasting and magic. That's a part of it. It's a witchcraft religion. But when I talk about Wicca on this channel, that's the Wicca that I'm talking about. So that's the spiel. It's 17 minutes. I've never actually bothered to time it. People must get terribly bored of me when I give this spiel. But I wanted to put it up on the channel here just because I talk about Wicca a lot, but it occurs to me I've never really talked specifically about what Gardnerian Wicca even is. And that seems valuable. So thank you for listening. My voice is going, so I'm going to stop talking, but I will see you all sometime soon.